Right. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Casey Slive, and I'm a food access coordinator at Ohio Department of Health, and I will be introducing the presentation today. So welcome to our webinar on starting and sustaining community gardens. Next slide, please.
Well, thank you, Casey. My name is Danielle Dillon, and I work with Casey at the Ohio Department of Health, and wanted to give a little bit of background about why we're offering this webinar today. We work within health promotion, and two main programs within that are Healthy Eating and Active Living, which is the HEAL project, and also creating healthy communities. And this shows the coverage area for both of those programs throughout the state. Something that we've noticed in our work with local communities is an interest in starting community gardens and also sustaining the work that's already happening locally with community gardening. So based on feedback that we're receiving from our local programs, we wanted to offer this session today. So it's through Casey and also her work with OSU Extension that we wanted to offer this for everyone. And we do recognize that in addition to folks who are connected to those programs, that we also have individuals who are connected with food councils who are also attending the session today. So I just wanted to welcome everyone and continue the good work, and hoping that this session will support that.
Fantastic. And for anybody that is just joining, if you wouldn't mind putting your name and the community that you're with in the chat. So appreciate everybody chiming in there. So just wanted to share a little bit of background on my role. So as I mentioned, I'm a food access coordinator with ODH. It's a relatively new role. I just celebrated my first full year in the role, which is exciting. And just wanted to share a little bit about the resources and support that I'm able to provide with my role. So I'm here to provide technical assistance support for food access work with both the HEAL and CHC programs, as well as all counties around the state. So a little bit of my past work experience includes produce prescription programs, nutrition education, chronic disease prevention programming, hospital campus gardens, coalition and partnership development, local food councils, youth garden education, healthy corner store initiatives, and others. So that's some of the food access type of work that I have experience with. But please don't ever hesitate to reach out if there's anything I can be supportive with as you're troubleshooting and working through the very important work that you all are doing around the state. So whether it's sharing resources, brainstorming, providing connections to other folks doing similar work, etc. Please don't hesitate to reach out. So my email is there. So a little chime in that Tim McDermott and I worked together on a hospital campus garden previously. So it's exciting to see that continuing. So, next slide, please. So just wanted to go over our agenda for today. So the presentation portion will be about an hour. And so again, our presenters, Tim and Pam, will be discussing how to start and sustain community gardens, best management strategies, approaches for reinvigorating existing community gardens, cultivating garden leadership, how to best engage community members in your garden, as well as common barriers and how to overcome those barriers. So then after their presentation portion, we will have 30 minutes for Q&A and discussion. So we are looking forward to a great conversation and discussion and end. So please hold on to your questions, and we look forward to hearing those. So So we've got two fantastic presenters today with OSU Extension. Pam Bennett, who's a professor with OSU Extension, Clark County horticulture educator, and she's also the director for the State Master Gardener Volunteer Program. We also have Tim McDermott, who is an OSU Extension Ag and Natural Resources educator and associate professor with OSU Veterinary Medicine. So Pam and Tim are both extremely knowledgeable and doing amazing work around the state. And we're really grateful for their time today and their expertise that they'll be sharing with us. So thank you so much to Pam and Tim. And I will let Pam take it from there. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Casey. And Tim, I'm not sure if we really know a lot, but we are old and we have a lot of experience. So that is what we are going to share with everybody today. And Casey, I am in my car right now down to Cincinnati Zoo, getting ready to attend another program on annuals. And if it gets too noisy in the background, Casey, please interrupt me and let me know. I had to roll the window down or leave the car on in the air conditioning, and it really is a beautiful morning. So just let me know if the noise in the background gets too much for everybody. All right. So Tim and I are going to come at this from different perspectives. I'm looking at this from a small community. I'm in Clark County. It's more of a small to medium community. You can see there our poverty level is around 16%. Our median household income, a little over 54,000. And we have several smaller communities, Springfield being the main city in our community Springfield has about 50,000 people. We also have a very large Mexican population, Hispanic population, and a very large Haitian population within the last couple of years. So I'm going to talk a little bit about successes and challenges and how smaller to medium communities can do community gardens. And then Tim is going to talk about larger communities and his experience and successes and challenges. Before I get into actual smaller communities, I want to talk about the history of community gardens in Ohio in general. I started Extension in 1992, and at that time, community gardens were really big throughout Extension and throughout our counties because of a significant community block grant program that came into OSU. Cuyahoga County distributed the money from that program. We all in each of our counties had to submit grants, but they were pretty much in charge of that. And Cuyahoga County had a very large community garden program. When I finished my programming in 1993 with Master Gardeners, we started our first community garden program. And around 99, statewide, that community block grant money just vanished. We didn't receive it anymore from the federal government. It was distributed other ways. So all of us pretty much had to kind of regroup and figure out, okay, how are we going to sustain and support our community gardens? So most of us until about 2008 were pretty sufficient with local grant money. Our local grants, our organizations, our foundations, we're really good about that. But then you all know in 2008, we had kind of a recession. From then till about 21, we kind of scraped by every year with a variety of funding mechanisms to help us keep these gardens going. And in Clark County in particular in 2022, we were able to work with our county commissioners as a result of American Recovery Act money to get some funds to hire a community garden coordinator. So community gardens have been in the state of Ohio for several years, but they've just been with different iterations in terms of who managed them, how they were managed, and how they were funded. So what we've learned in my 30 years here in Clark County with community gardens, in 1993, we finished our first Master Gardener volunteer class. And I'll talk a little bit more about Master Gardener volunteer program and how you can use that as a resource here shortly. But we had our first class and one of the volunteers came up and said, hey, one of the projects we want to work on is community gardens. And in 93, Clark County had no community gardens. We had a few block grant programs that worked through garden centers and gave people seeds, but we didn't have an organized community garden program. So one of the first mantras with community gardens is that the community has to come to you and say, we want a garden. And I'll talk about that in a little bit too. But since there wasn't one, we thought, okay, let's start one. This will be our example. And hopefully when people see that, then we'll start the ball rolling and others will be interested and others will then want to come and start gardens as well. So we found a neighborhood. We had somebody come in, clear the land. It was in a low income area, and we created that interest in the garden. And from there, our program grew probably to around 30 to 34 gardens at one point in time. And it's gone up and down over the years. In 1994, we were able to get some of that block grant money, and we hired a program assistant who really helped us tremendously in terms of increasing the program, keeping it sustainable, and taking care of all the little challenges that come up in a community garden situation. And it was really a game changer having that part-time program assistant. She worked 20 hours a week, year round. She did educational programming. She did a whole bunch of different tasks. And she was pretty much the point person for that community garden and that community leadership that was necessary to keep our 33 gardens going. So throughout the years, we've gone up and down with gardens, but as long as we had somebody employed either by OSU Extension, by the city, having that point person, we were able to sustain our gardens much easier than when we got into the point where we weren't able to hire somebody. So our program leader would meet with neighborhood associations. Somebody would come and say, hey, we want to start a community garden. And I remember distinctly back in 2008, when we really hit that recession, our sheriff came to us and said, hey, we want a community garden at the jail where the guys in the jail are going to raise the food and the produce for the jail. And all that sounded great. But when I asked them, I said, okay, who's going to manage the young men and the people who are incarcerated? Who's going to maintain it in August? Who's going to teach them? What is your plan once you get this garden started? Because in 2008, everybody was like, gardens are the way to go. Community gardens are going to help everybody. But nobody really thinks about that August part of it. And I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, and I don't want to throw a wet blanket on everything, but it seems like that is something that people miss when it comes to community gardens, is who's going to maintain it when it gets to August? Who is going to be responsible for the weeding, the harvesting, when it gets to be really hard? Because let's face it, gardening is work, and somebody has to be there in 90-some degree weather, providing water, providing weeding, and so forth. So once we told the sheriff, and he really went back and thought about it. We had a firehouse. The firemen came and wanted to do it. We certainly didn't want to discourage people, but we wanted to be upfront with them, and we wanted them to be successful from the start. So we made sure we laid out, here are the steps that you need to have a community garden. So it's really important to make sure we don't romanticize it. We don't say that, oh, this is going to save everybody in the neighborhood. Here's the reality of having a community garden. This program leader also worked to develop garden leaders. So if we had a neighborhood garden, we would ask for 2 or 3 people to help become garden leaders, so that when our program leader couldn't be there to assist, they were there encouraging people, motivating people, kind of keeping people organized, and really becoming those point people in that garden that would help keep that garden and sustain that garden. So those garden leaders would attend workshops and classes. We'd go to the American Community Garden Association meetings and really try to develop their leadership so that they could take on some of the duties that our program leader would be doing. So some of the basics, motivating people. When we get into August and there are tomatoes that happen to be, need to be harvested. Last year, our Promise Neighborhood Community Garden, they ran out of people to help them harvest tomatoes. And if you don't keep harvesting them, you may not continue getting products. So we had volunteers. We put out an all call for people who would come and help us. But interest kind of wanes during that time of the year in some cases. And we're going back to school. Kids are getting back to school. So interest wanes, and you need additional help during that season. Locating the site. A neighborhood or association comes together and they say, we want a community garden. You've got to find a site that's going to give you plenty of sunlight, a site that, who owns the property? Is the property going to be taken away from you? Our very first community garden, the property owner lent it to us and said we could use it. But a few years down the road, he was able to sell it to the city for a significant income. And so therefore they lost that community garden site. So finding that site that is sustainable is really important. Although, there are some temporary sites that could work, but you got to think about and balance how much money, how much work do you want to put into that site if there's a potential for that being lost in the near future. For the community who views these community gardens, One of the worst things that you can do is let a garden become weedy, let the grass around the area become overgrown and unkempt. Community members are watching. And in New Carlisle, we had a situation a few years ago where they didn't want community gardens because their perception was they're going to be a weedy mess and they're going to attract rodents. So keeping that property neat, keeping it tidy, having your members participate in total property cleanup and so forth, that is really important to have in a community garden setting. This person also helped to remove barriers to having gardens in the city. We all know there are some challenges. You know, some cities, they don't want chickens, and we've had to go to our community leaders and say, look, what's wrong with having chickens in this community garden? They don't want bees and certain things. So there are some things you have to do to work within the city government that you might be able to have help with some program leader. You know, if we had one point person that could do this citywide or countywide, it sure helps those 30 some community gardens who are trying to do this by themselves. So we have kind of a group assistance here where you can go to that point person says, yeah, I've done this before, and here's what we need to do. Helped find funding sources. When funding was tough, our community garden program leader, she'd have to go out and look for grants. She'd talk to people in the communities. She would raise funds. Finding those funding sources is also important. So trying to prevent 30 gardens from competing against each other for money, she would help find funding sources that ideally then the community gardens could apply for, and we could help each garden individually. Organizing plants, seed, and supplies. You know, garden centers, nurseries, places like that get hit up all the time for donations. Our thinking was if we had one point person and we put an order in, we say, hey, you know, we'll even help pay for some of these seeds or these plants. If we can get that all through one person and then we'll distribute them to all the gardens, it makes it a lot easier on the garden centers. They would rather prefer to work with one person and provide lots of flats, you know, leftover flats, whatever is available, than to have 30 garden people coming and saying, hey, can we have this and this and this? So we kind of had, again, that it was an organized, it was called the SEEDS program, sow, educate, eat, and diversity, so that point person was the one that was going to all the organizations and organizing plants, seeds, and supplies, and then distributing those out to the community gardens. And then I put this last, but it really is up there with the right site. Water source is crucial. You know, there's all kinds of community gardens. Tim's going to talk about different types. I've got a few different types to give you as examples. But if you don't have a water source, it's going to be very challenging to succeed. So looking for that water source, you know, nobody wants to haul water in the back of their trunk, which people do, to get to a garden site if it's not on their own property. But having that water source is really, really helpful in a community garden. And there's a lot of different ways you can do that. And Tim's going to provide some great resources that we have through Extension that can show you ways to set up water sources. Rain barrels. Many of our gardens are using rain barrels. We worked with the city one year to put in 4 hydrants at 4 sites that we knew were going to be permanent sites. So we wrote a grant, we got grant money, it cost $2,000. Our program leader worked through the city to get those hydrants at those sites, and those gardens were sustainable and are still going today because of that additional water source. And then there's education, and that's where Tim and I come in with Ohio State University Extension. We've got incredible resources to provide to you, but we also have volunteers and our educators who can help with some of these things. Soil testing is one of the first things that we talk about when we're selecting a site. If it's in the inner city, it's around old houses built in the 20s where there would be lead paint possibly available. We need to do soil testing. We need to figure out, you know, is there lead in the soil? If there's lead in the soil, then do we build raised beds, or do we do it in ground? Teaching people how to grow vegetables. You know, a lot of people don't have that experience. If they haven't had parents who've raised a garden, it's the first time doing it. So they need to know how to do it, how to plant. In some cases, we were working with low-income communities where people didn't even know how to read. They couldn't read. They could see the pictures, but they couldn't read, you know, the directions. So we would work with some of our organizations to help make sure that if reading was a barrier, let's make sure that we can help them with this. Pest management. I don't care how good you are at gardening. you will always have a pest problem, whether it's rodents, whether it's groundhogs, squirrels, whether it's insects or diseases. There will be pest problems. So we can help you identify those pest problems. We've got fact sheets, we've got all kinds of resources to help with that. And then, as I've mentioned a couple different times, harvesting is really important. You want to keep harvesting green beans will keep that crop producing for a period of time. So encouraging and motivating people on when to harvest and how to harvest. Then in addition, the use of the produce. What do you do with it? You've got a squash. What do you do with it? How do you use it? You've got tomatoes. You've got things that maybe you've never grown before. How do you use those in recipes? So we have resources for that. And then, like I said, raised beds. Do we do in-ground? Do you need help with building those raised beds? And again, that's where volunteers and that organizational structure can come into play. So currently in Clark County, we are working with our local food council and with OSU Extension. We're intertwined very closely, and we have developed a community garden coalition. So these are all of our gardens that are kind of out there. They've done quite well, but they need some assistance. So we've brought them together. We meet on a monthly basis. In the summer months, we are visiting different gardens and getting different ideas from people, because everybody has their own way to do things, stake tomatoes, irrigate and so forth, but they're getting ideas from other gardens. And one of the things that is really critical to success for gardens is those relationships with other organizations. This coalition is like, well, I don't have this, but I have access to this. So we're building that coalition and those relationships within the community, the county, people that can help us. The health department is part of this coalition. We're really trying to work together as a group to meet some of the needs of our community gardens and also to work through those barriers. We also provide support and outreach. So we've created a website. We've got a calendar of events. So if a garden is hosting an event, an educational activity, everybody in the county is aware of it, and not just the community gardeners, but other people in the community, those areas that may not have community gardens. We're recruiting volunteers. We're helping to reach out to volunteer organizations for maybe a work day. We've got a United Way work day coming up for the 9/11 week of service. And several of our volunteer community gardens didn't know about this. So we're connecting those United Way workers with those community gardens. Scheduling events, so our gardens distribute their produce. And helping with food insecurity. Was a soil amendments. They're not in really good neighborhoods in some cases. They're in compacted clay soils. We don't have lovely soils here in Clark County. So they need soil amendments such as organic matter. So through our relationships and through talk.
Pam, when you get back, you might want to turn off your camera because your feed is frozen now and has been choppy on and off a little bit. So bear with us, gang. Pam is frozen, and hopefully she'll be able to pop back in here soon. We'll give her a few minutes and try to see if we can't reach her outside of.
Thank you for your patience.
In the meantime, while we wait, if anybody has any questions that they wanted to ask based on what they have heard already from Pam, feel free to put those in the chat and I can start to address some questions that you might have about community garden. while we wait for Pam. And if we can't reconnect with her, then I'm happy to jump in and start my presentation. And the good news is we're going to talk about a lot of similar things, because based on me watching Pam's presentation, there's some similar challenges in places. So there's going to be some overlap between what we talk about, but that's a good thing. When I was going through veterinary school, they taught me that clients won't remember what you tell them until you've said it at least 3 times. So we'll say it at least 2 times. And then for Casey, our hospital community garden, I was there yesterday and did a class with Josh on fall gardening, and it is a show place over there. He has a tremendous harvest.
Really neat to see him get so into it. So grateful for all of your guidance there, Tim. Well, we've got one question that just came through the chat. A couple questions. Tim, do you want to start speaking to those, or do you want
I
to?
will. That's
Okay.
great. So I don't know, Jenny, exactly what Pam was recommending. What I recommend for any growing, whether that's in your community garden or in your backyard or your container, is as much organic matter that you can get in any number of forms. And that could be compost. I love shredded leaves. We are about to approach the greatest free distribution of organic matter. My trees have already started to drop leaves, and that is what I start my compost pile with. But if you have no way to compost at your site, shredding your leaves and dumping them straight on your plot at a community garden is a great way to add organic matter. In fact, leaves are a tremendous source of nutrients. Believe it or not, there are more nutrients per pound of leaves than per pound of manure. So, best fall harvest items and when to plant. Right now, I would say just wait a few days for outside planting, because I don't know if you guys have looked at the weather, but we have 90s coming up in Ohio for several days. That makes me so sad because it's so beautiful out right now. Summer is my 4th favorite season. I like fall the best, and so this taste of fall is my favorite. But I would say as soon as the heat wave passes, you can get lettuce and any of the leaf brassicas in the ground, kale, collards, bok choy, mustards, radishes, green onions, carrots. If you have grow lights inside and you have the ability to grow indoors, I would say right now I would start things like lettuce seedlings and kale and collards, so that you could put a transplant out later in about 3 or 4 weeks when you get a little size on them. Pretty soon, we're going to be coming up on the time window for planting overwintered crops. Overwinter, you can, believe it or not, grow and harvest your own fresh produce in Ohio all 12 months of the year. And I will be planting probably mid-October my kale, my spinach, my bok choy, and believe it or not, cilantro. If you didn't know, cilantro is a cold season crop, and it is extraordinarily hardy in cold weather. And then I'll use row cover, and I will protect that, and I will grow. And for any garlic growers, the time for garlic is coming up. That time frame is easy to remember. It is between Halloween and Thanksgiving. And so, Anita, I would say, is there a fall gardening webinar available? Kayla, yes, I have a bunch of them. In fact, I will put links for all of that. I have a website here, Growing Franklin, and on the Year in Growing page, there is an entire 12-month, 33-piece of educational content for new to intermediate growers, teaching them how to grow all 12 months of the year, including a fall gardening webinar. Plus, I just did one with the Nature Conservancy on living your best fall garden life, and I will share that. And I have one on growing over winter as well. So, and to address Anita's, do you have recommendations for what to use on site to compost? You know, it really is going to depend on the rules and regulations of your community garden. And so if you want, Casey, we're at 10:30. I can jump in and start my presentation. There's going to be a lot of the information that you would have gotten in Pam's will be in mine as well. All right. Let's start.
I'm back, Timothy.
Pam's back. Sorry, Pam, we wrote you off. We figured you were in the zoo.
Yeah, I got attacked by Fiona. No, I can wrap mine up with a few more comments. I don't have the slides. Casey, the slides were too big to send, so I can wrap mine up. So I was at the amendments, the soil amendments, which is really essential for our gardeners. We worked out with our solid waste management district. He has some grant money for composting. He is going to deliver this to a certain location, and in the fall, we're going to have all the community gardens who have trucks. They're going to bring their trucks. They're going to get loads of this, and they'll be able to take it back to their own garden site. So that's what this coalition has the capacity to do. They are able to, work things out and find other people in the community. And a couple of things, we did a survey of our gardens in terms of what they need. And the needs were some of the basics: soil amendments, seeds, plants, supplies. But then in our small community, they also need things like tillers, a tractor. So our Community Garden Coalition is writing for a grant where our Master Gardener volunteers in Clark County would have the tiller, and then people could borrow that. So these one-of type equipment that people need, we're working on and managing ways that people can use these. So there's several needs, and funding is a huge need for us. And I always say this, in Clark County, we don't have the Cleveland Foundation, the Cincinnati, we don't have the foundations that some of our bigger communities have. We have smaller foundations, and we can get $5,000, $2,000 grants from them. So we struggle sometimes with getting that funding for some of the bigger items that can be used in a community garden. And then in terms of success, it takes a team approach in a small to medium-sized community, and I'm sure possibly in a large, Tim can tell you that. It takes a team approach. It takes that project person that's going to be the coach, that is going to be the project leader and help coordinate everything. It takes a couple quarterbacks in the garden themselves. You need somebody who's motivated and who comes to you as a health department or an organization and says, we want to be part of a community garden. How do we do it? And they're going to help cheer people on. You need those cheerleaders to help, come on, we need to weed. Come on, we need to harvest. We need everybody here. Create events, create activities in the garden, make it fun for people so that they come to the garden. We have one garden, Jefferson Street Oasis, that has been around for about 15 years now. And it's because there is one community cheerleader who stays there and helps them on a regular basis. And if he's not there, we wonder what's going to happen to that. Will the community continue to pick that up? Will those individual gardeners continue to pick that up? So community gardens require those partnerships, whether it's in a school garden. Casey had a whole list of the people she works with, whether it's a school garden, a hospital garden. There's a variety of different organizations to partner with. If you're just starting out fresh, look for those partners to help you, who may be interested in that. Churches are an excellent place for community gardens, but those partners can be very valuable. And there's a lot of resources. I mentioned Master Gardener volunteers. I saw the counties that logged in under the chat box. Many of you have volunteers in your county. Reach out to them for those educational resources. They serve as a mentor. Their focus is on educating. So they serve as a mentor. They can help you with those challenges, those questions that you might have, in addition to Tim's resources. And we also have the Grow Ohio program, where many of our counties are raising produce and donating it to the Second Harvest Food Bank. In the last 2 years, we've donated, or food banks rather, the local food banks, we've donated over 85,000 pounds across the state to food banks. So you might want to see if that's happening in your community. We also have the Ohio Victory Garden program, where we participate with the Ohio Department of Agriculture, and we put together seed sample packets. We have 300 available for each county. We're expanding it to 65 counties this year, with eventually going to 88 counties. It'll go through your extension office, and in April, they'll have these seed packets available to distribute. We partner with our Department of Health and get those distributed out to many of our neighbors. This might motivate people to start a garden in their own backyard, as opposed to maybe working in a community garden. The whole idea is if we can just get people interested in growing their own vegetables, whether it's a community garden or whether it's in their own backyard garden. So you can go to u.osu.edu/Ohio Victory Gardens for assistance there. So there's a lot of resources that OSU Extension can provide to you and assistance. But the final point I'll make, in order for these to be sustainable and successful, is there's got to be passion. And whether it's passion with Tim and I, who are really engaged in this and passionate about community gardens, Casey and Danielle, who want to see these succeed, you folks who are passionate, you've got to have those people in those communities, in those neighborhoods, in those organizations who are also passionate about doing the work and doing the hard stuff that makes it so much fun when you have that celebration of the harvest and you make a bunch of salsa and fresh tomatoes and all the great things that you can do with it. So that passion is the key to being successful. So Tim, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Pam. I am going to share my screen and get started. Whoopsie. All right, Casey, give me a thumbs up. You can hear me fine and you can see my slides.
Yep.
Outstanding. So first off, I would love to be an associate professor, but I'm still an assistant. I have to go through the tenure track process. And so when I saw that, I was like, wait, maybe Casey knows something I don't, but she doesn't. I'm still there. So let's talk about Franklin County. And so Franklin County is our largest county by population in Ohio. We got 1.3 million people. And when we look at some of the trends about population movements, what we find is there's going to be a significant portion of our population in urban environments. They're going to consume a lot of resources, and we really do need to figure out how we can grow more food in urban environments. Are we going to be able to completely grow? No, but I've seen where urban agriculture can provide up to 30% of the food inside of an urban space. And in fact, if we mix in controlled environment agriculture, hydroponics, we can maximize the use of our space as well. So here is my super giant topic list, and we're going to try to hit on all of these, but I'm going to go through them stepwise really quickly here, and then we're going to touch on them as we go. Types of community gardens are important. And when I say types, I'm going to break it down into something like a municipal garden, which is where I garden. It is city maintained. Some of them are neighborhood or community maintained. They might be on a church. They might be at a school. They could be on land bank property. And then how are they funded? Are they free? Because I know of a bunch of community gardens that are free in neighborhoods. Are they for pay? I actually have to pay a fee for my community garden, and that pays for the maintenance by the city and the water that I get. A lot of times people will use grant funding to source money for their community gardening. But to get to what Pam was saying, really, when I see a community garden get started, it's almost got like a bell curve. It starts and then there's tons of energy at the beginning, and then the weeds hit and things like that, and the energy goes out. And really maintaining that energy and doing the capacity building is critical in a garden. And really that comes down to leadership. If you have a strong and dynamic leadership team, and I like a team because people move, people take new jobs, people have life events, having a team in place to maintain that energy is very, very important. We're going to talk about the land bank because where to get land is really, really critical. And here in my urban environment, it is very difficult. Maintenance, who's in charge of that? That comes to the leadership team or the type. And then when we talk about how we maintain vibrancy, I'm going to share some examples of other ways that you can use your community garden, because there are other things that you can do. It's not just about growing on that space. And then if they're educational, and we do have community gardens that are maintained by organizations in order to engage youth, to teach people how to grow, those as 501(c)(3) organizations, if they are incorporated as a nonprofit, do have an additional income stream available to them. Water is mission critical. If you do not have water, you cannot grow. And wait till you see the global climate change slides. I'm going to show you about what's going to come our way for urban environments. I'm going to provide you a mountain of links for educational support that is all free and open to the public. You can share it. You can host it in your public health things. Most of it's all on YouTube or easily clickable. And then I'm going to share some examples of projects that we've done here for educational support and capacity building in our community gardens, our school gardens, and things like that. And then I put organic versus non-organic because as a person who does educational outreach and as a community gardener, I get questions about organic versus non-organic all the time. And you're going to find that people were very passionate about that. And that is one thing that you need to be intentional about if you want to be good neighbors within a community garden, because basically in any community garden, it's like a little tiny village. People live right next to each other and they do stuff right next to each other. So in Ohio, we have some challenges. 1 in 7 households are food insecure. In Franklin County, 1 in 5 children are food insecure. That is absolutely horrible. We really have a pretty dynamic community gardening scene here in Columbus, although we're working on figuring out what that scene is. What we found in COVID was we really didn't know what we have, because what happened in COVID, wherever you were in Ohio, early March, basically the lockdown started, and then everybody was sent home and they wanted to grow their own food, and every single product was sold from every single store, and people wanted to figure out where they could grow, and we didn't have great answers for them. But I'm going to show you how we're addressing that, and I'm going to show you that it's a template that we're going to be able to share with you. Franklin County, like Clark County, is tremendously diverse. Over 1.3 million people, large populations of wonderful new Americans, immigrants, and refugees. I love working with them. I hate to say, most of them are conflict displaced agriculture professionals. So they are coming here wanting to grow. And that picture right there is me working with BCCO, the Bhutanese community of Central Ohio. They are conflict displaced agriculture professionals. They know how to grow. They just need to know how to grow here, because we have a different climate, we have different soils, we have different varieties we can grow. But that diversity is celebrated. We have an international harvest garden here that has a number of different cultures. It is a multi-acre garden. For an example of our diversity, Columbus City Schools is located here. It's the largest school district in Ohio, and over 100 languages are spoken by students of Columbus City Schools. Now, where we have a tremendous problem is our land availability. We used to have a land bank, and I say we used to, we kind of still do, but it's been locked down. And most of the properties are located in economically disadvantaged or marginalized communities. The land is not necessarily amazing. I will show you, though, a transformed land bank property. What we have found is land bank has locked down the availability because our land pressure in Franklin County is white hot. You might have heard we had the Intel plant coming in. Just this week, Google announced $1.7 billion of investment into Franklin County. And so what they have done is they removed the availability of properties, not because they don't want more gardens. The land bank properties were getting taken and built up with market rate housing. They're saving that for affordable housing now. We do have support from our leadership, and leadership support is absolutely critical in any community if you want a dynamic urban or rural community gardening program, because they are the ones that are going to facilitate land access or provide funding or provide leadership. And they wrote that in our local food action plan made by the City of Columbus and Franklin County commissioners. That is all about how food can impact people's lives in a positive way. And one of those goals is improving the access to and education about healthy food, affordable food, and local food. So what they've done is actually put some money in the pot in order to do that. They have a gardening grant. It is an urban gardening grant, and it is a partnership between the city and the Franklin County Board of Commissioners and Scott's Miracle-Gro, and then it is moderated by the Columbus Foundation. But nonprofits, community gardens, church gardens, school gardens can apply for up to a few $1,000s to capacity build their garden. The problem that we've had is we have had so many more created gardens, especially at schools, that they had twice as many applications this year as they have had in the past. So I am a community gardener myself. I garden at Wallace Community Gardens, and I have been there 27 years. This is my 27th year growing there. That sounds like a long time, but it is a drop in the bucket for Wallace, because Wallace is an actual original Victory Garden remnant, one of 3 that I've been able to find in the United States. Multi-acre, plot size 30 by 40, right? That was because they wanted people to grow a garden for Victory to feed their family. And my backyard is deep shade under walnuts, maples, and hackberries. So I go down the street and I garden at Wallace, and you look at it and you see these immense trees. And that's because Wallace is 80 years old. It was started in the 1940s in World War II, and those trees were saplings at the time. And now they actually do shade a little bit of it. Where the marker is where my plot is. I've been there a long time, so I have a full plot right in the middle. In urban agriculture in general, we do have backyard growers, community gardeners, teacher educators at school gardens, urban farmers, and traditional farmers. So challenges, pay or free. If you have people paying money to garden, that puts a little skin in the game, and that gives you a pot of money that can be used to do the maintenance. If it is free, then you need to figure out where that comes. Pam had mentioned nuisance wildlife. I always say I give 20% to the four-legged predators, 20% to the two-legged predators, and then if I get 60%, I'm happy. But if I did not aggressively fence and try to protect my crops, I would get nothing. I would get nothing at all. Wallace is a public park. I've seen people haul produce out. I've seen 4 or 5 deer at a time in my plot. The picture in the bottom middle was when 2 baby fawns would live there. They would stay there overnight. They would eat my food and they would poop all over the place. And then we do have a lot of people that come and pick produce, and they will come because they say it is a community garden. And so we're coming in there and we're harvesting produce. And I guess I have a real difficult time being upset about somebody who is, taking produce if they're going to eat it. But it does wear on growers if you spend a long time to grow delicious vegetables. And when you come down in the morning, they're all gone. And that really takes the steam out of a grower. So making sure that you have some sort of rules in place and some options for people to try to mitigate some of those things. My garden, they actually have signage all around the garden now to dissuade people from coming in and harvesting, because like I said, there's no fence around there. It is wide open and they can come in at any point. And then the weeds, like Pam said, if you stop your garden maintenance for a hot minute at Wallace, it has been building up pests, weeds, and disease for 80 years, and it will grow and take over your stuff. Now, one of the impacts that we have on agriculture is the impact of global climate change. And one of the outsized impacts that we have is in urban environments where we have a lot of hardscape and a lot of buildings and a lot of asphalt. And all of that sucks up heat during the day and then radiates that heat out at night. And that can tremendously impact a grower. It can be 10 degrees or 15 degrees warmer in the middle of the city than it would be if we went outside of 270. And the problem is not just the heat during the day, but the heat buildup overnight. And this chart doesn't really drive the point home, but this one does. So these are the projected climate zones from now to 50 years. And if we look at Ohio, we will see that right now it is going to turn into something tremendously different. Take a look at the colors that we're modeled at. In Ohio, in 50 years, we're basically going to turn into southern Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. That is going to be a real challenge for a community gardener down the way. How do we mitigate it? Not great ways to do that. There is some urban forestry stuff that is coming out to try to plant in some of these urban environments to bring the temperatures down so that it's better for health disparities, because a lot of the communities that we have poor forest canopy in are the same economically disadvantaged ones that I showed you in the land bank properties. So institutional support, I personally believe, is absolutely critical. That there has to be some help for a lot of the gardeners, and that can come in many forms. As Pam said, and I will echo, water is mission critical. I will say that here in Columbus, Ohio, Columbus Public Health and Franklin County Public Health do not espouse, nor do I do, water catchment to irrigate your produce in your garden. I like potable water that comes from a city source, unless you do. We do have some community gardens, believe it or not, that have sunk wells down and put in hydrants and then have that tested, and that is perfectly fine too if they get it from a safe source. But make sure that your water is potable. What my garden does is it actually mows at the end of the season. We have to have the garden cleared out by November 1st, and then it will come through and mow. And then around April 1st, it comes through and it rototills the garden and it lays out stakes. They do have signage, and signage is a great thing to have at the garden because because that is where people can put that I have extra produce, or I have a rototiller if you need me to use that on there, or I'm looking for somebody to garden with me in my plot, or Tim McDermott has an educational event that you can click on this QR code and you can find things like that. And then I like to have places where people can congregate and not necessarily garden. So right here, there's some benches. They're out in the sun, but you can see in the bottom right, if you could see behind those dumpsters, you would notice that there's picnic tables under those large poplar trees, and that's a nice shady place. I actually do classes on those picnic tables with 4-H kiddos where we'll talk about stuff and walk around the garden. I like the bike access. You can see that there is some places where people can ride their bike to the garden and safely lock them up. We used to have accessible raised beds at the garden, and they're being replaced right now, but those beds were in a spot that was ADA accessible right next to the parking lot, so somebody in a wheelchair could go and wheel up to the garden that might be 28 inches tall or something in order to garden if they have some accessibility challenges. And so when you think about your community garden and you want to make sure that you are keeping the energy up, I would consider how accessible is it? Is there bike paths there? Is there walking paths there? Is there a bus stop there if people need to come to it? Is there a place where people can park if they have to drive? And then when they get there, you want to ideally make it about more than just the growing, because you're going to find that a lot of people will use the space if there are some ancillary things. For example, the community garden that I garden at has 2 different playground areas there. So if a family wants to come and bring their kiddos, the kids are going to get bored digging in the dirt after a little while, but if there's swing sets and playgrounds, then that's going to give them something to do in a safe space where mom and dad can keep an eye on them. We also have a living playground, and when I say that, basically what they did is they got large boulders and they put them in ways that kids can climb over them and climb around them, and that's another thing that has the ability to engage kiddos, get them started in gardening, but when they kind of tucker out a little bit, keep them in the space so mom and dad can continue their growing. I like to have a meeting space area there because if I'm doing educational content, I want to be able to sit down and teach. But if we have people that are working on a hot day and they need to take a break, having a place to sit down and at the garden in the shade where they can cool down is very important. Our community garden has 2 other things that are pretty different, but something to think about. Believe it or not, there is some land that is to the left of the garden, and that is a dog park. And so in the same public park where my community garden is a dog park. And that's a good thing and a bad thing, because sometimes people let their dogs run around, and you'll have dogs running around the community garden. And quite honestly, dogs are not really good at gardening. One of the things I've found about them is they can be a super asset for many, many things, but I've not met too many really awesome dog gardeners. And so we have to be considerate neighbors if we're going to do that. But then another thing that they did that I thought was cool, in the bottom right picture, they turned the perimeter of my community garden into a mountain bike course for kids. And we have a little bit of woods next to the garden that you saw in the picture, and there's a playground area associated with it. And so what you can do is you can take your mountain bike, and kids can be biking all over the place around the trees and under the shade and up some embankments. And it's just an interesting, different way that they can use to engage. We have had a lot of picnics at our garden, right? Farm to table is a wonderful thing. To be able to pick something and then bring it to a picnic area and enjoy it is one way to think about using that. And then having community events by the garden, having music, having things like yoga in the garden, having nature walks in there. I bring 4-H kiddos. We have a spin club in our garden. So think about the other ways that you can engage. Educational support. I do a couple different things. One of my favorite ones is called a garden walk, and that is an experiential thing where I just show up, I talk for a little bit, and then I walk around with all of the growers. They point out what their problems are. Other people can learn from that experiential learning. At the Mount Carmel Healthy Living Center Community Garden yesterday, we had a garden walk for fall gardening, and we talked about tomato disorders and what to plant now, and all kind of different things. And what was really helpful for the people is they got to see a problem, ask a question about a problem, and then talk about it, and then relate that to what they have growing. I'm going to share you the links that you're seeing on this screen right here. I have a website. I have an OSU Extension Franklin County YouTube channel. I have a tremendous amount of video content created. All of it is free and open to the public, and you can just drop those links into your social medias. You can host them on whatever website you have in your public health department. Very, very useful. We have a problem in urban environments actually getting in front of as many people as we would like. I was in a rural county before, and it was easy to talk to people. Everybody knew who Extension was in a rural county. Their kiddos were in 4-H, and the farmers went to pesticide applicator training. But we really don't have as aggressive of a presence in urban counties. And so one of the things that we did here at Extension was partner with a local television station, WCMH Channel 4, in order to do short segments where we educate on food and nutrition topics, actually all 4 program areas in Extension, and that drops down to Extension Today. So I will share these links as well for you. They are all the topics on the right. We have 56 different topics. Probably half of them are related to some form of growing, harvesting, nutritional prep of seasonal produce in tiny videos that are very, very easy to share. And they're all kid safe if you want to use them in schools or something like that. So what we do in Extension is we are the outreach arm of the university, and we engage all Ohioans in actively improving their lives by sharing the knowledge and research of the university to our county client residents. I'm in Franklin, Pam's in Clark. If you want to get a hold of your county educator, you go to extension.osu.edu, locate an office, and I shared that link with Casey, and she will share that in the follow-up email to everybody. One of my favorite things to do in engagement is at schools, and I like to grow at schools. Our gardens at schools are not only outdoors, but they're indoors. And I do things because we need to engage them in academic calendar growing, and we need to start our engagement inside a classroom. And these are some pictures of some amazing kiddos. And we did some filming for Extension Today here. And the nice thing about gardening is you can use that even to engage some of the kiddos that might have some disabilities in learning, but boy, they really enjoy growing. And so I put this picture here because of my super awesome photo bomb in the back that I just love. All right, one project that we did that we created a template of engagement in Franklin County was called the Buckeye ISA. And what that was through a grant, we were teaching families with children how to grow their own food in economically disadvantaged and marginalized communities throughout Franklin County. And what this was impactful in is it really allowed us to collaborate assets all over the city and figure out what assets we had. One of the things that I would do in your county is make a list of the assets that you have, and you'd be surprised at what you have. You're going to find that you're going to have probable institutional support and definitely educational support, but we also had places that allowed us to use space for free for education. Public libraries and rec centers and churches were awesome for that. We have a tool library in Franklin County. You can actually go and you can take a little bit of learning to learn how to use these tools, and there's a place where you can borrow tools like a rototiller. A small fee involved in that, but that is an ability for folks to use assets that are already existing in order to capacity build their space. Many libraries in Franklin County host seed libraries where instead of having books that you can check out, they will take in donated seeds and repackage them into smaller packages. And then people, when they need seeds, can do that. We have a lot of our urban producer groups will do plant and seed swaps as well. Everybody knows that you probably got a box somewhere if you're a grower that has a whole bunch of seed packets. Some of them are old and useless. Some of them are great. You won't use them all. If you can find somebody that can use some of them, then that's an excellent thing. But what we did is we hosted classes all over the place, and we really got some good engagement, and we got a number of people interested in growing. And this was all neighborhood and place-based and really driven by the leaders in individual neighborhoods. Another thing that we're doing is we are actually doing ArcGIS mapping of the urban spaces and community gardens in Franklin County where people can grow. We're doing this for really a couple reasons. One, in COVID, we learned that, boy, did we need this map. We needed to have a place that we could send people when they're like, I need to learn how to grow. Then we could have them go to this location and they could type in their zip code and they can find the garden near them and the contact information of the people that grow. This is going to be a game changer tool for us. We're working with the Knowledge Exchange as well as a bunch of folks in Franklin County to do that. We're creating a template of how this is done, and then this will be something that will eventually be able to be done in every county. And this is going to allow us, one, to connect the people that need to figure out where they want to grow, but also it's going to allow us to find the gaps in our game. What neighborhoods do we need to put community gardens in? Where are we lacking urban agricultural production spaces? And once we figure that out, we can work with the land bank, both City of Columbus and Franklin County, to identify properties or with churches in those locations to see if they can grow, and we move from there. So I got a couple little quick videos that I'm going to show you. This is a land bank property on the south side of Columbus. This street has been known as the murder capital street of Franklin County, where it had the highest per capita death rate. And the urban grower is a minister. This is the street he lives on. This is right down from his house. He took a land bank property and he wanted to convert this into, I would say, a hybrid of a community garden and an urban farm. He grows and distributes produce. We go here and we teach classes. It is a wonderful spot. We grow in raised beds because the soil is generally very poor in a land bank property because it had a property on it. They remediate it and they put fill dirt on there. We've had to go through the rule and regulation process for season extension structures and for compost and for water access and for any number of things in order to facilitate growing. Because we have a vibrant and dynamic leadership in both the City of Columbus and in Franklin County, and they support this, we found it a little bit easier to grow. So this is my garden, Wallace Community Gardens, and this shows what it looks like after it's been laid out. And this is in early spring, and you're thinking, wow, this must be really early spring. It looks super, super cold, and it is cold and wet and dreary. This is COVID year. Do you guys remember how cold COVID year was? This is mid-May. We're very behind on our growing. It was probably 42 degrees on this day, but if you look, we got leaves on the trees. So in my community garden, it's laid out like a grid, and we have water stickouts at the four corners so people can access their water. You can see that that had been rototilled and then staked out. They put stakes with flags so people know where their spot is. But then let's look at it now. So this is COVID year as well. And in fact, there's the signage. Boy, it was great to have community gardens be accessible in COVID year. One of the best things that happened was making food production deemed essential. And so this is August in the community garden. And as Pam had mentioned, what do you do when it's August? We have a lot of food in this garden. We have a lot of weeds in this garden. Every single one of those sunflowers that you see was not planted. The 13, 14, 15 foot tall sunflowers have grown into a weed at Wallace Community Gardens. Everybody leaves at least a few of them go. And then it's very common to see a ton of people come and take pictures down here because it can be so vibrant. You'll notice that our pathways are mowed. The city has started doing that. I work with the city to come up with best management practices for community gardening. Happy to share those with you. I worked with the city to come up with our rules and regulations document around community gardening, and I can find that document as well and share that so that you have that. On that note, I am done. And there's my email, and that's my community garden. And looking at what is growing in there, that is probably June 1st. So I am going to stop my share, and I'm going to stop recording as well.